welcome to the SGX3 seminar. 2025, the first one. So I'm Sandra Gesing. I'm the director for SGX3, and we have this webinar once a month, the third Thursday of the month, and it's my pleasure to introduce a long collaborator team of SGX3 with Globus and using Globus to build science gateways. So welcome, Joe. Ask your questions. You will have time also at the end. So I did not ask Joe what he prefers, whether in between or at the end. So we will look at the chat, and from here to take it away, Joe.
Perfect. Yeah, no, definitely feel free if there's questions that come up, happy to answer them as we go. I do have the chat open, so I'll try to keep an eye on it too. But yeah, very, very happy to be here and be talking about using Globus to build science gateways with this group, just because I think a lot of the work we've been doing recently hopefully resonates and makes things easier for folks here. So yeah, just to kick things off. So I'm Joe. I lead the web team at Globus primarily, but a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be going over definitely contribute a lot towards. So happy to get into technical details or really answer any questions that come up. So just really quick agenda, what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give a brief overview of Globus just to kind of give us all a little bit of the same page, make sure people are familiar. Talk about Globus and how it fits into science gateways. And then I'm specifically going to be talking about our serverless portal solution. So really quickly, almost an elevator pitch of what is Globus and what are the core sort of tenets and features and functionality that we provide. So Globus is a software as a service, also a platform as a service. And within the research community, a lot of the features that people reach for us for are things like data transfer, data access, data sharing. We have an automation product within Globus Flows. We also offer managed remote computing via Globus Compute, and then also data publication and discovery via Globus Search. And so how does it fit into when you're building a science gateway, or how do we kind of see where we fit into that story? And so like I mentioned, we're a platform as a service. And so all of the features that I mentioned provide APIs that can be integrated directly into your application. One of those solution areas specifically is Globus Auth that can act as a federated authentication system and a security fabric for your custom application. That's a point where we see a lot of integrations happen within Globus. To make those integrations easier, we offer a couple first-class SDKs. So we have our Python SDK that we use within Globus ourselves. So it's something we built and we also use. And the same thing for our JavaScript SDK. If you're familiar with our web application, the web application uses that JavaScript SDK. So you know when you're reaching for these SDKs, you're using the same things we're relying on, which means we're keeping them up to date, both from a feature perspective, security perspective, and really just making sure you're able to use the latest and greatest. And then taking all that into account when you're integrating with the Globus platform as a service, or even just using the SaaS, you're taking advantage of the fact that there's over 2,600 connected institutions, which means over 1,800 identity providers, tens of thousands of active endpoints where you can obtain data from, connect to, and kind of see where connect and collaborate where your data is, and all that's happening across the globe. And so in the context of science gateways, thinking about Globus, these different solution areas, one of the things we really want to provide for this group and really anybody building a gateway or portal is answer the question of and provide things that allow you to not start from scratch. And to do that right now, we have two solutions that we really promote. The first solution that's been around for a while there are Django-based portals. So you might be using these now, or you might have heard of these or looked into these. And the basic idea behind these they are a set of tools that allow you to use Python and Django to build portals. And these still exist today. We still offer it as a solution and want folks to be able to grab that when that makes sense based on their application requirements or their stack context. But the other thing that we've introduced recently that I'm really going to be diving into today is the serverless portals. And so just to give a quick definition, when I say serverless portals, and you'll find I swap gateways and portals almost interchangeably, and this is just out of habit, so I apologize. I'll try to stick to one. But when I say serverless portals, we mean JavaScript-based client-side applications that target common use cases within the research space. So the examples I'm going to show today are data discovery and data access. But the real requirement here, or the real sort of differentiator here, is that they require no managed infrastructure for the application itself. So you might be familiar with the Jamstack or just serverless applications in general. And so these applications really take advantage and rely on a lot of those tenants to create a gateway or portal specific to these common use cases. And so just taking a step back and talking a little bit about our motivation of, why we wanted to offer another solution, or, where we saw we could improve the solutions we had. And these three questions can kind of act as these sort of guiding principles of what we did develop. One of the things we wanted to do was lower the technical barriers. We wanted to simplify the infrastructure. So the idea of kind of going this serverless approach, but then also take into account the maintenance burden that often comes when you're deploying a gateway. A lot of times we recognize that not only deploying these can be maintenance from a developer's perspective, but a lot of times you're also trying to keep up from an integrations perspective. So even integrating with something like Globus, you have to make sure you're on top of what things are changing or what new features are available for your gateway to provide those things. And so this is where we've come up with a solution. I'm going to be walking through a demo today that kind of goes through setting one of these up live, and I can kind of break things down from there. But one of the solutions and one of the levels of the solution is our Globus provided serverless templates. And what these templates provide are basically trying to address all those motivations with bringing everything together in kind of a simple, easy to use package. And so what these templates allow you to do is distribute a portal or gateway by simply editing a JSON file. When you edit that JSON file, it's going to kick off some continuous deployment that actually automatically will deploy to GitHub pages by default. Since we're going to be using GitHub pages, that means we're not going to have to worry about having an application server running. We're actually going to be using the free tier of GitHub, so we're not even going to have to worry about paying for the application infrastructure. Within the templates, we also have lifecycle support for the solutions that we're going to be implementing, and that's all managed via Dependabot. So if you're familiar with GitHub, when Dependabot is configured for a repository, it's going to automatically open up pull requests and tell you when there are updates to upstream packages. We treat the actual serverless application as a package. So that means when we make updates to it, you're going to get updates to it, and you can decide if you want to merge those things, deploy those things. The solution that I'm going to be covering today, every aspect of it is open source. So the idea of the templates themselves, the underlying applications that the templates reference, and even the tool chain that is being used to build these things. And then all the building blocks within the application, you can keep kind of going lower and lower in the stack, and you'll see the SDK is open source. We're using some other application. There's some other packages like a React's context that is available in open source. So really just trying to make this all available to the community for use at a level that makes sense. And speaking to that, all this is built with the idea of providing a developer experience that is familiar and can be maintainable, and then also extensible. So the idea that these templates, might solve a solution for some folks, but people that want to get more technical, they can keep diving lower in the stack. That makes sense for their use case. And so I'm going to actually just jump into a demo here, because I think seeing this all together and then breaking it down is kind of a good way to walk through this page. So I'm going to actually share this entire screen now. And I think I'm sharing. So let's grab. So I'm going to start from the template that I mentioned. So Globus is on GitHub. All of our open source code is available on our Globus organization. And these new serverless portal templates you'll be able to find really easily from our organization page. So I'm just going to go into these templates. And we offer 2 different templates, and I'm going to show an example of the search portal template later on, but let's actually build a data portal. So I'm going to go to the template. And from this template, all the steps that I'm going to be running through and all the information that I'm really touching on is in the readmes of these templates themselves. So you can do this on your own. You could try following along right now, but I'd rather prefer you kind of watch and then maybe do this after the fact. But all these steps that I'm going to be running through are available within the readmes. And so you can do this on your own today if you would like. So I'm going to start by going to the top of the template. And so when you have a template on GitHub, you get this really convenient button of using this template. So I'm going to create a new repository from this template. And just to speak a little bit about the GitHub account I'm using, right now it's not affiliated with Globus in any way. This is just a GitHub account I've created specifically for demos. So the idea here is, if you have a GitHub account, you have access to this and you can do this. This is really the only prerequisite for the steps that I'm running through right now. So the first step here, I'm going to give my repository a name. I'm just going to call my new repository Gateways. Repository name here it's going to matter in the sense that it's going to be in my GitHub Pages URL. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're using a custom C name for your GitHub pages, or if you're going to wind up hosting somewhere else, you can kind of use whatever you want. But I'm just using Gateways because I'm going to make it easy for me to remember during configuration later. So I'm going to create that repository. This is going to take just a second here. As that's creating, and it's finished now, I'm going to pop over to the settings. And then what I'm going to do is in the pages, what I'm going to configure is this source, and I'm going to allow it to actually use GitHub Actions as a way to deploy my GitHub pages. And so this just allows the default configuration of our GitHub Actions that we have actually cloned by creating a repository from that template to run and have the proper permissions to actually deploy to GitHub pages. So I'm going to go back to my code. And we'll see the first build failed, and that was just because I didn't change that setting fast enough, which is totally fine. But what I'm actually going to do is go into this static.json file. And this is where the application framework or the application design pattern we put together starts to show, and kind of the different levels that you can actually integrate and make changes to these applications. So the static.json file acts as basically a build manifest and a configuration manifest for the underlying application. And so you see here, I have some really, really basic properties that are, things like a title. I have some privacy policy information. And then you might see things that are familiar if you're familiar working with Globus, where I have an application client ID, which is just an OAuth application ID. And then I have some transfer settings for a collection ID and path. So we're actually going to change these values to Globus specific, or to new values, so I can actually deploy this application. But these are the default ones that come with the clone. And actually, I'm just going to kick off a build here just so we can see what the default pages look like. So 1 second here. I'm just going to run this. I might let this run in the background while we make some changes. So all I did there was run an action that's going to actually kick off another build. But while we're waiting for that to actually deploy, what I'm going to do is open up a new tab and open up the Globus application. So let's just go to app.globus.org. And once I'm logged into Globus, the thing that I need to do is just configure an application. So I mentioned I need a OAuth application. And the reason I need an OAuth application is because I want my portal to be able to log in with Globus. So I'm actually going to go into the settings tab within Globus, the developer section. And I've already created a project, so I'm just going to go into this project. If you're familiar with Globus, there are many different scenarios where you'll need to authenticate to ensure high assurance and different security levels, whether it be accessing a collection, or in this case, actually accessing a OAuth application. So I'm going to go ahead and authenticate again. It's just making sure that I'm staying within the 30-minute session. Now that I've gone through that, I'm going to go back into my demo project, and we're going to actually create a new app for today. When I'm registering this new app, I want to create a OAuth public client. So this is the application that I'm going to be creating. Let's just give it a new name. And so the only configuration that I actually need to provide is this redirect URL. And the redirect URL, if I go into my configuration here, I can grab my GitHub pages URL. The redirect URL is going to be a redirect back to my GitHub pages application that I've deployed in the background. And again, this is just for configuring the OAuth handshake and making sure that I'm allowing Globus Auth to allow my users to log in. So I'm just going to add this redirect to /gateways, authenticate. And I'm going to register this app. This is going to give me a UUID that I'm going to use in just a second here. Let's go back over to my page and see if it deployed successfully, which I think it did. So it deployed, it's on this page. So this is what will be available if I was to check that box in GitHub before that initial deployment. And so nothing really to see here other than I have a static page being hosted in GitHub. If I click sign in right now, it's actually going to lead to an error because I haven't configured that new application that we actually just set up while we were waiting. So let's make it so I can log in. So going back to that static.json file that we were referencing before, I'm just going to go ahead and edit this from the GitHub GUI. So that application I just created over in the GitHub or the Globus app, I'm just going to copy that UUID and paste that in. And then let's make another change. Let's change the title as well, please. And then commit those changes. And I won't change any of the messages. We'll let that go here. And so now that that's kicked off, the build is going to go through this process of using the shared GitHub action that we have to actually build and deploy this new gateway that I've configured. What actually occurs, and we can kind of jump in and see the detail of the steps that are being run through. What's happening here is the template that I cloned has a reference to an application that targets a specific use case, in this case, the data portal use case. It takes that static.json file configuration and uses that as a way to seed a lot of the configuration values within that application and effectively build a new version of that application specific to my static.json file and then deploy it to GitHub pages. Under the hood, the application, which we call generators, is just using Next.js. So it's a React-based application that becomes a static site that can really be deployed anywhere. But in this specific case, we're just deploying it to GitHub pages because it's easy and it's free. So this will just take a second here. And then if I go back to my page that we launched, I refresh. I might hit cache here for a second. Let's see. There we go. So we saw a title change, nothing too extravagant there. But now let's go ahead and sign in. So when I sign in, again, I configured a OAuth application within Globus just by swapping out that UUID and changing the redirect URI to my pages or to my GitHub pages URL. And so now I'm prompted with a few different scopes that the application will need to interact with the Globus services that the application relies on. So I'm going to go ahead and allow this. So now I've logged in with Globus, and I actually see effectively what can act as a really simple data access portal for a collection that I might manage within my science DMZ at my institution. By default, I'm connecting to a collection that's hosted at Eagle. I have some very basic interactions with the collection, so I can browse the directories, find the files that I might want to transfer elsewhere. And then I can search for, a target collection that I might want to transfer to. Let's transfer to tutorial collection 1. And this is an example where I'm transferring to something that requires additional consent. And from an integration perspective, we at Globus deal with this all the time because we know all the different scenarios that you might run into interacting with things like session timeouts or interacting with things like data access consent. This is all built into these portals. So I can go ahead and consent to this. It's going to bring me back to the page after I allow that consent. And I can kind of go back to what I was doing here. And let's transfer, let's actually make a new folder for us. So let's demo. Now I've got a new folder in my target destination, and let's go ahead and do a quick transfer. So I'm just going to kick this off. And so I've transferred this information between these two endpoints. Now, further customization here. Obviously, you probably don't want folks using this collection, this pre-configured collection, but the idea is going back to our code. I can very easily change what collection this is pointed to by just swapping out the IDs. So if your organization has a Globus collection, all I have to do is swap this ID, swap this path, or not provide a path if I want to use the default path. And this becomes a really easy way to kind of accommodate, concepts around open science and making sure that your data is available. So this is one solution. This is the data port solution. I kicked off that transfer. I can link over to the Globus web app now and see transfer went through. I can likely refresh there. Oh, I'm in the folder already. There it is. So that file was the file I transferred. But then from feature standpoint, within these portals, they're all really kind of geared towards these specific scenarios. So I can do things like accessing the files directly if the collection supports HTTPS, also download them directly if that's something I need to offer. I want to pull up some of these other examples that we have that I think are worthwhile taking a look at. So within the Globus org, like I mentioned, we have the templates, and then we have some example repositories of these portals. And so going to some of these examples, I can pull up one where we are actually using our search implementation. So example search portal with transfer. And this is an example of my data being published to a Globus search index. So allowing a little bit of discovery, the discovery of information, but then also allowing transfer. So the same data that we were seeing in that other example, this search index has in it. The idea here being that I could add metadata to this so it's easier for people to understand rather than just dropping them in a file system directory. But so going in here, you can see I don't have really many options to do here because I'm just kind of browsing. But as soon as I sign in, again, just using my Globus account, this one is actually my actual Globus account here. I get a little button to add to a transfer list. And so I go back here, I can pick things that make sense to me that I actually want to transfer. And then if I go to my transfer list, you'll see kind of similar to how you might interact with Globus on the application or how we just interacted with Globus in that other solution. I can sort of create a shopping cart of data. I'm only going to do one of these. Let's do that. And then let's do tutorial election. And then do it on my user path, and then and so very similar to how it works in the other application, once I start the transfer, I can manage that from within Globus. But really kind of the idea of simplifying the ability to make these interfaces and make these applications that are really geared towards your users and geared towards your use cases. So just to look at what the configuration of this serverless search portal looks like, to do all the things that I just showed, all I'm doing is adding some configuration to give things a title, give things a headline. When you see what properties are displayed, that's all configurable. So you can use JSON references to actually decide what values are displayed in your UI. And then from the Globus integration perspective, you're just, again, connecting that client ID. So the authorization is hooked up for you. From the search perspective, connecting it to a Globus index that has that information as well. Let's go back here. So some other examples of this, and let me actually jump back to my slides real quick. So just really quickly, kind of how this is happening, and just talking a little bit about the structure. So the underlying application design approach is really allows us to do this is that static.json file plus this idea of using GitHub Actions or just continuous integration to link up that static.json and use it as a build manifest with these applications, what we call generators. So the static.json pipeline sort of looks like this, where you're taking that static.json file, running it through continuous integration, referencing that generated code, then deploying that. And then from a deployment perspective, you're launching what is effectively a serverless Jamstack, however you want to think about it, JavaScript application that can live on any static host. We saw it hosted on GitHub Pages. I can pull up another example here that shows using S3. But really anywhere you might want to host it. So if you do want to manage the infrastructure for hosting that, that's an option too. It's really kind of up to you. You can kind of use the pipeline as far as what makes sense to you. But then from an application level of the actual portal, it's really similar to what we often refer to as a modern research design pattern, with this idea that you're reaching for these RESTful APIs and kind of using the features that they provide to get a lot of your state, to get a lot of your access control. And so that way, from a hosting perspective, the only thing you're actually managing is your Science DMZ and where that data is. The application is relying on, in our case, the Globus platform, and then also the infrastructure of the static site host. So I mentioned two different templates that act as these specific application solutions. So the search portal and the data portal. But you can really go beyond the basics here. So the basics being just using our templates as is, configuring some of those options and making it so that, changes the title, changes the background image, maybe looks like your branding. But going beyond the basics might look like something like adding custom content. And so this is an example where, again, we have our static.json file, and we could look at that. It's configured very basically, where I have a client ID, collection ID, again, a title. But one of the things this implementation also has is a content directory that actually allows me to provide completely custom content via Markdown. Also supports JSX, so by way of MDX, so you can actually do JavaScript, interactive JavaScript within this custom content. But really, the only limitation is your usage of JavaScript or what you want implemented on these pages. This this example, very simplistic, the idea that it actually, if I go to the content page here and we look at the markdown, there's nothing different than any other markdown file here. This is just a markdown file. But doing this allows me to have maybe a home page that explains, again, what my portal is. And then I can also take that even further by adding arbitrary paths, by having documentation, folders, directories, and then all of those things are just hosted within my application. So this is an example of a markdown file that's sort of deeply nested here, but you can sort of see how, you can use the base of these applications as a way to integrate with these, more complex features around Globus of having data transfer and having integration with search, but then maybe just really simply providing content via Markdown or JavaScript, however it fits your team's requirements. Another example of a more advanced sort of implementation is the idea of hosting it elsewhere. So like I said, everything we've seen so far has just been hosted on GitHub pages. So if you notice, all my URLs are github.io. I could use a CNAME to actually make that, joe.com if I wanted to, or I could push it elsewhere and use S3 and then use, maybe AWS's DNS functionality to actually have a custom domain. We have an example put together that shows exactly that. Doesn't go as far as customizing the domain, but extends the behavior of the GitHub action. And all we do is we tell it to not deploy to GitHub pages. And then I can pretty much take that asset that's being generated and push it anywhere. So in this case, the asset, I'm pushing it to Amazon Amplify. And so here's a Amplify URL. And from the integration perspective, it's the exact same thing. From configuration perspective, I can go into my static.json file, change these values, change the client ID, change whatever customization I want, but I'm hosting it on S3 instead of GitHub. And then taking it even a step further, like I mentioned, the entire tool chain here is open source, and the design pattern and what actually makes this possible really can be implemented using your own sort of templates or your own generators. So let's say you have a specific use case where you don't want to use Globus at all, or you want to use Globus in a very specific way that our templates don't provide. You actually have the ability to create templates, the same way we're creating templates, and allow customization, or maybe not allowing customization, to allow folks to be able to spin these up really easily. So that might make sense to you if your organization requires deploying a gateway per user, and you want them to you only want them to configure certain values within the static.json file. That's a possibility here. So really that core tenet of making this extensible and familiar at every level and making sure that it's maintainable really underlines a lot of the things that I've been covering here. And so as far as slides, and I can show a couple other examples, and happy to do some more demos, talk technical details, but really that's what I have for today. And I think like the majority of this is it's a lot of kind of putting these pieces together and seeing how they fit together and using the serverless portals to hopefully accomplish something that's useful for you all. Have contact information here. We have a bunch of links. We'll definitely be sharing the information on these slides. But yeah, I'm happy to answer questions if there are questions now.
Many thanks, Joe, for the great presentation.
Yeah, I think I heard a question up there.
I wanted to say, so people can speak up, raise your hand, put a question in chat, whatever you prefer.
I just had a question, a couple of quick questions. One is, to enable these portal applications, do you need to have HTTPS enabled on the collection?
No, you do not. So the example that we were looking at, and actually, it's this data portal will react to your collections configuration, right? So we're seeing these features here specifically because this collection allows HTTPS, but if you don't, these features go away, right? So the idea is that, again, we've learned a lot building the Globus web application, and like we know all sort of the configuration things that can change behaviors and should change behaviors. So we're building that all in for you.
Okay, cool. Then just, and maybe this is the same answer then, is that are there any additional concerns or things to think about when deploying a data portal with a high assurance environment?
No, so I mean, from an implementation perspective, it's no different than our web application, and the access and the rules for access are gonna follow all those HA requirements. So let's say, and you can actually, we saw in my configuration of my Globus app, one of the things that I can do in addition to HA, I could actually make it so you are required to log in with a specific identity provider. So like you actually gain another tier of authentication requirements by deploying your own application in this way and just using Globus Auth to manage that. But from the HA perspective of the user interaction, all those things will be respected. So if you have a 2-minute timeout for reading, if you had that requirement for some reason, if I have this open and I try to transfer that, it's gonna tell me, hey, you got to re-authenticate. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, you actually picked a really good data set. I was teaching the School of Aviation, so interesting with the airport and the climates. Let me just ask you a question in terms of if you wanted to do a comparison between, say, two different years, decades apart of the same airport. Can that be configured somehow between, like, say, I don't know when the database started. I'm assuming these are years 1952. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. These are
okay.
Here.
So say like 1952 and 2020, whatever the most recent one is. Just can we do a comparison between data sets with some sort of code configuration, and how would that work?
Well, so I think there's a couple of things there, because I think the actual comparison likely happens outside of the applications I've demonstrated today. But as far as like accessing and surfacing that information in a way where, these saying, hey, these data sets are relevant, or like these data sets you might want to compare. One of the things you can use for that is our search implementation. So if I go back to the examples here, and let's just go to.
And then once the results come in, we can rename it in our own file, correct?
Right. So that's your file system, right? So
right.
none of the data is stored here. And so that was going to be the other part of my answer, is a lot of that's up to you and how you actually store your data on the file system.
Okay.
Right. And so the idea that these are categorized by the airport, that just happens to be how we've stored these on the device.
No, that's perfect, actually.
What this example shows is maybe adding some metadata on top of that storage, right? So if I go ahead and go to region here, these just kind of acts as effectively tags on these results or these files that actually exist on the file system somewhere. But this sort of becomes a way to maybe convey, these are relevant to this experiment, or these are relevant to these observations. So these are the data sets you might want to download, or these are the data sets you might want to transfer for your computation. And so again, by signing in here,
so then we can access the data sets, store, and then download them, and then use them as we need to on our own systems.
Right.
Okay.
Or your own system, whether that means your machine or where your compute is, or you have whatever makes sense as far as actually running your analysis. So again, just to like run through that sort of use case, I might be,
Okay.
I want to work with all the data, all the airport data in the South. I can add these to my transfer list. And so now these reference effectively what are file paths on my system within my Science DMZ.
Okay.
I can transfer this where my compute is. I can transfer this to my local machine, wherever that analysis is going to take place. But this example using Globus search is a great way to kind of add that metadata layer that can help, really help people find data aside from just, here's our file system. Good luck finding what you
right. No, great example. And thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Would it make sense, or I don't know if this would even make sense, but extending the portal to enable access to the compute, to Globus compute?
Yeah, so we definitely are looking at because basically the way we're approaching these portals is what's the common use case, right? And so we really saw these two as one portal targeting data access, which is what we're looking at here, and then one portal targeting data discovery. But the idea of, even using the previous example of, okay, once I have the data, like I actually want to run a compute, like I want to run compute with that data, or I want to run a Globus flow with that data. Those sort of integrations are the things we're trying to really figure out what makes sense. I think one of the good example of this is actually this discovery integration of integrating with transfer. So we're taking this idea of discovering the data and then transferring it. We at the same time, very likely will provide something, discover the data, and then run a flow with it. So all definitely looking at it, and it just becomes, what are the common use cases out there?
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I have one more question, Joe. Sorry about all these questions.
No, these are great questions.
Yeah. As Sandra knows, I'm teaching a course, and we are trying to integrate data set and access and usability in the course. It is in the School of Aviation here. How, I guess, with students, is there going to, or are there specific requirements that you would want to have if a student were to be accessing the database, knowing full well that a lot of them don't have a lot of coding experience or anything like that? That I don't want you guys to be overwhelmed with, students saying, "Hey, what's this? What's that?" and so forth. Any suggestions on how, or even if, this is applicable or for students to use?
Yeah, so I can tell you one of the drivers for this solution and these portals and what we're doing is really trying to help assist with the idea of open science, right? And trying to just make data accessible to anyone, whether they're students or just somebody who's curious on their own. So from a integration standpoint, I mentioned, Globus Auth has integration with a bunch of IDPs already. So you can very likely log in using your student account and have access to the data that is already open to the fact that, you have an account at uchicago.edu or wherever you might be. It also means you'll have access to whatever public data is out there as well. As far as, what data is available, I think and how they use that data, that outside of these portals, it kind of becomes, what computation they're running, and it's kind of out of the application's hands at that point. But I do think, really one of the goals, we want this easy for everybody and make it, again, access is a big thing we're going for.
And then, sorry, one other question. Some of the databases, if we want to, I guess, transfer or download the data into a computing system at the university, I can see some issues there in terms of storage and capacity and things like that. And any suggestions on ways to maybe reduce the amount of data transfer into a different, into a system like university systems or something like that?
Yeah, so I can't speak to actually things like ensuring certain bandwidth restrictions are in place or ensuring specific size requirements are in place, but from a implementation perspective, as far as like what Globus provides more as a platform as a service, and specifically talking about Globus Connect server and Globus transfer, like there are a bunch of knobs that you can put out there of who has access to what areas, where they can actually do transfers, as far as what even partitions are allowed to place their data on, that could be used to allow or enforce those types of requirements. If I probably want to have our Globus Connect server team or even our customer team sort of field those requirements specifically and give you a more direct answer than probably I can give. But I do know, because even so, using our tutorial endpoints that I've kind of been connecting to as an example, those do have limits set on them. So you can't just put a bunch of data up there. Those also like will clear out data on a schedule. So you can have all these configured. I don't have the specific configuration that you would need to make that happen, but I do know it's possible within the ecosystem for sure.
Right, I understand. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a quick add to that. So at every institution, even if you have a collection that is attached to a certain amount of storage, and I don't think you can go above the capacity that is being allocated to your project. And if you do, it's your responsibility to clean it up and make space for whatever you need. So I wouldn't worry about that if I'm setting up something like that.
Okay, thank you. I just have to make sure that the students don't download too much. The transfer too much.
Okay. Any other questions? With that, I would say thank you again, Joe. This was fantastic.
Thank you.
Very good.
And when there are no further comments, we give everyone 8 minutes back. And yeah, so we will send an email around. We have at the moment 2 candidates for our next webinar in February. And a lot of things are going on with SGX3 and NAIR at the moment, with focus groups and the workshop at the beginning of February in San Diego. So we will also talk about that in the future when we have our output report there. And thank you everyone for joining. And see you hopefully then in latest at the next webinar again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great job, Joe.
Thank you all. Take care.